أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق الله سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين وصحبه الأخيار المنتجبين وعلى جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. These days, according to some narrations, we commemorate the demise of Lady Fatima, salamullahi alayha. I thought to start my talk with a part of the will that Lady Fatima gave to Imam Ali alayhi salam before she left this world. It is narrated that she said to him, إِذَا أَنَا مِتُّ فَتَوَلَّ أَنْتَ غَسْلِي وَجَهِّزْنِي وَصَلِّ عَلَيّْ. If I die, wash me, prepare me, pray over me, lower me into my grave, fill my grave and level the soil over me, and sit by the side of my head and recite much of the Qur'an and supplication. For that would be the time when the dead person needs the company of the living. Lady Fatima is emphasizing the recitation of the Qur'an before she left this world. And she also clarified how important it is for her to be hearing Qur'an even when she is under the ground. We ask Allah, inshallah, that He may accept from us this little that we are doing in trying to understand the Holy Qur'an. أما بعد يقول الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. Inshallah, this talk will be the last one in which we'll be covering Surat Al-Tawheed. So this will be the 7th lecture on Tawheed, and inshallah it would be the last. So let me give a quick recap so far. So we have covered, or at least for the past couple of lectures, we have covered some group of verses from the Quran that talk about, or where the Quran is actually criticizing, attributing real children to God, believing that God had some real natural children of His, whether in the shape of angels or humans or in any form. And we said that the Quran was very clear in denying this, denying outright that God has any familial relationships with any of His creation. All of the creation of God are described as the creation of God, the servants of God, and they are needy of God. They're nothing special in and of themselves. There's no father and son, there's no wife and child, there's nothing like that in terms of natural relationships like we have. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran denies it outright. And also we discussed a group of verses that, well, they don't claim that God had a child in the sense of natural kind of children, not in that sense, but some claim that, well, God adopted children, meaning that God chose this certain person or this certain creation to be someone dear in and of herself or himself. That this is something special above my creation, meaning that this is a kind of a copy of God. Like if you worship that, it is as if you worship God. If you worshipped or honored that adopted child, it is as if you're honoring the father, the adopting father. So yes, God does not have natural children, but He could adopt kind of children. So this is something that also God denies outright in the Quran. So this is what we have concluded so far, that the verses of the Quran were very, very clear, denying this. That those who claim that any of His creation, any of God's creation, it could be the holiest figure that you've ever thought of or you've ever encountered. These holy figures, even those, they are mere creations of God. They are needy of God. You can never claim that anything is a copy of God, is a deity like God. Nothing at all. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarifies, deity is always His. Divinity, worship is always deserved by Him and Him alone. No one else, nothing else. Perfection is God's and God's alone. No one else and nothing else. This is something that we clarified and we emphasized over and over, that the Quran emphasized also over and over. And this is what becomes the introductory explanation of the last verse of Tawheed. What was the last verse of Surat Al-Ikhlaas? What was the last verse of Surat Al-Ikhlaas? وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. And none whatsoever can be compared to Him. Allah is incomparable. Nothing can equal Him in His status. Nothing can be even compared to Him. This is how you see that Surah Al-Tawheed, every verse comes and explains more about the verse that comes before it and emphasizes it. Right. So this is what we've covered so far, and this is really some of the essence of the Surah Al-Tawheed. If you go out with only this message, it is great. It is great. A question here is posed. Did the people of the book, the Christians, the Jewish people, the pagan Arabs, at the time of revelation, did they really believe that there were real children of God? Did they really believe in that? Did they really believe that God had naturally some children? Now some come and say, well, look, the Quran is mistaken. They say the Quran is wrong. Your Quran, your book is wrong. It's mistaken. Why? They say, well, because the Quran is saying that you Christians, you're claiming that there is a real child of God, and the Quran is wrong. There are Christians who don't believe in that. Now if you go and find some Christian groups, maybe not all of them believe in the same belief, that, for example, Jesus is the natural Son of God. Maybe. So they say, well, your Quran is wrong. But that's not correct, because the Quran, we said, the Quran criticized two concepts. It criticized those who believe that God had natural children, and those also who believe that God adopted children. He gave a specific special status to some, in and of themselves, right? Not by any actions they've done or any goodness that they've displayed. No. Right? So these are like God. So God kind of adopted some. The Quran criticized both. Not just those who believe that, for example, God had real children or a real son. So this is where there is an important Quranic principle I want to discuss today. And that is, you have this sometimes. Like, look, your Quran, your book, someone might say, your book is claiming something that is wrong. Why? Because today, for example, you might find this group and that group who don't believe like the Quran claimed that they do. And so we ask, when the Quran was addressing these groups, when the Quran is addressing and speaking to the Christians, when the Quran is speaking to the Jews, when the Quran is speaking to the pagan Arabs, who is the Quran speaking to here? Is the Quran talking to all Christians until the end of time everywhere? So when the Quran is saying, Ya Ahl al-Kitab, O people of the book, O people of the book, is the Quran here addressing all Christians and Jews from the beginning of time or from the time of their revelation to the end of time? That's a question. So when the Quran is talking to the pagan Arabs, when the Quran is addressing the pagan Arabs, is it addressing all the pagans, all times, of all places? The answer here is the principle that I want to say, is that when you want to come and judge the Quran by a claim that it is making, according to a historical claim it is making, when you want to come and judge it, remember this, that the Quran is addressing the people of the book at the time of revelation. It is addressing the Jews at the time of revelation. The Jews of Arabia. The Jews or the Christians or the people of the book or the pagans that interacted with the revelation of the Quran. That time, that context. That's something that's very important to remember. When the Quran is talking to people of the book, the Christian community, the Jewish community, the pagan community of the Arabs, it is actually talking and addressing those who were in the context of the revelation, of that time and that place. Not all the pagans till the end of time. Not all the Christians till the end of time. Because you might have Christians who would say, well, no, we don't believe that. Okay? So, that's one very important principle to remember. Okay? I hope that is clear. If not, please tell me. The second thing is that when the Quran then is talking or addressing those people of that time, the Christians of that time, the Jewish people of that time, the pagans of that time, is it also addressing all the factions of Jews of that time? All the factions of Christianity of that time? All the pagan people of that time? Or is it addressing it to a specific people? I'll give some examples. When the Quran talks about burying girls alive, when the Quran talks about that, is it talking or attributing this action to all the Arabs of that time? The records of history tell us that not all Arabs engaged in this. Maybe a tribe or two. Some of the Arabs engaged in this terrible act. The Quran spoke in general, and he would say, وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ. When the buried girl would be asked, why were you, for what wrong were you killed? Okay? The Quran spoke in general. But is it really something that all the Arabs used to do? No, records of history tell us that. No, it's just a few tribes. And it was in the context of war with Persia. And those Arabs, those tribes, they would fear that when the Persians, they would take our women captive, they would humiliate them and humiliate us. So we don't want that humiliation. And this is why they thought, okay, let's bury the girls alive if we have girls. Not all Arabs did it. That's something very important. Even the belief that we mentioned that Allah took angels as his daughters. We talked about this in the past. Some claimed that Allah, he left for himself the girls, the angels as his girls, children. People attributed this to God. They said, to us are the sons, and the sons, the boys, are more honorable, and let leave to God the females. Remember, huh? Even that belief, not all Arabs used to believe in it. Maybe a couple of Arab tribes. For example, Khuza'a and Kinana, those Arab tribes, they used to believe in this. Yet the Quran generalizes or talks in general. So that's very important to remember, that when the Quran also criticizes something or some belief, it is not necessarily criticizing all the Christians that were present at that time, the Christians who were in Arabia and the Christians who were not. It is important to remember that in that context, the Quran is speaking or addressing the beliefs of the communities that were around. And it is trying to address those. Okay, I hope this point is also clear. So, it is possible then that the Quran is actually criticizing some corruption in some of these schools or factions inside the Christianity or inside the Judaism or Judaistic or Jewish communities. Some schools, they had some beliefs that this person is special with respect to God. That, for example, God adopted us as his children. You had that belief. Inshallah, I'll come to it in a minute. Right? So these two principles are very important to remember. What are they? Number one, when the Quran is criticizing, is rebuking a certain people because of a certain belief, the Quran is addressing the people of that time, of that place. So no one could come now and tell you, look, I'm Christian, I don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God, therefore your Quran is wrong. Habibi, no. The Quran is criticizing those people at that time, in that place, who used to believe this. And so go historically and prove for me that they didn't believe in this, so that you tell me the Quran is wrong. That's the first principle. The Quran is addressing the people, the community of the time. Second is that in this addressing of the people of the community of the time, it is not necessarily addressing all the factions of that time. Maybe some little group. But what is important here is the message. That's, someone might ask this question like, so what? It's a historical thing. What do I benefit now? Assume, okay? In the past, people used to believe that God has children, God has females, that God adopted this man as his son or this creation as his children. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ أَسْتَغْفِرُ okay? Assume. So it's done now. It's in the past. Why is the Quran now talking about it? Why do we have to care now? And the answer is for the same reason, or the benefit is the same as that of the stories of the Quran about prophets. The Quran has so many stories about history, has so many stories about previous nations. Of course, it's past. It's past. We shouldn't freeze ourselves in history, right? Why do we read history? Why do we read stories? It is to draw the lesson. It is to actually learn the lesson and apply the lesson. It is about the message that these stories want to tell us. Not to get attached with the stories. Like, okay, those people who claimed these in the past, okay, they all perished. Fine. But it is important for us to remember the message, the summary of those events. What is the summary? What? That God is one. God is incomparable. God has no special relationship with anyone. That nothing is like God. That nothing can be thought of as a mirror of God. That nothing can be thought of as a copy of God. Nothing is compared to God. That there is always a distance that needs to be respected between God and all His creation. That's the lesson. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Don't compare God to anything. Don't compare God to anyone. Don't elevate any of God's creation to any level above the mere fact that they are His creation, in need of Him, in absolute need of Him. That's the lesson that we learn. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us with all these answers to those beliefs. The tanzih of God, the transcendence of God. Allah is teaching us the glorification of His, the exaltation of God, negating any similarity, negating any comparability of Him with His creation. These are concepts that we need to remind ourselves of again and again and again. Never to elevate anyone to the status of God. Mini God, no. Small like this, no. A family of gods, God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the big God, but those are little gods. No. No. So that's, even if those beliefs expired, that lesson should remain. Should remain with us. And we should also keep ourselves in check to make sure that we don't fall into these traps. Because some people fell into some of these traps. Elevating some of the prophets maybe to a level because they were holy, because they showed miracles, and they elevated them. We need to also be sure we don't do that. Okay. The verses that I mentioned, or the note that I mentioned before. Let me mention this verse of the Quran. Chapter 5, verse number 18. What is chapter 5 in the Quran? Let's see who's with me. What is chapter 5 of the Quran? Pardon? Huh? No, not An'am, not Anfal. Ma'idah? Ahsant, it's Ma'idah, yes. I thought it was Nisa actually, thank you. It's Ma'idah, yeah? Ma'idah, verse 18. وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ وَالنَّصَارَى نَحْنُ أَبْنَاءُ اللَّهِ وَأَحِبَّاؤُهُ. Listen to this, huh? Listen to this claim. Listen very carefully to this claim. Allah is saying, the Jews and the Christians each say, we are the children of God and His most beloved. So now you learned, okay, that if some Jewish person comes today and tells you, look, I don't claim that, say that the Quran is talking about those people, okay? Or a Christian person says, well, I don't claim that, say that. The Quran is criticizing that. If you don't do it, fine, I respect. The Jews and the Christians each say, what do they say? Listen, we are the children of God and His most beloved. They are claiming that they are the children of God and they're the most beloved to God. They're claiming something special about themselves. Now, I'm not sure if they used to think that they are the actual physical, natural Children of God, I don't know. Maybe sometimes when you look at some of the Banu Israel, the way they behaved, as if they are the Sha'abullah al-Mukhtar, the elected elite of the creation of God, and they are better than all humans, other humans. Sometimes you think, maybe actually they used to think that they are God, that they are children of God, really. But in any case, what is meant by the children of God here? What do they believe about themselves? They believed that they were something special. They believed that they were more special than all of other God's creation. Do you see the point now? And they say, we are beloved to Him. It's like they're claiming a certain level of honor and prestige above other creations of God. There are people who still believe that. They believe they have a certain level of status. We are better than all other humans. Why? We are elected, selected by God. Superiority, supremacy, ethno-supremacy. And they say God loves us more. Meaning that if we do mistakes, we're close to God. He allows us. He loves us. He allows us to do things. He wouldn't really punish us like He would punish all of you lot, all of you other people. We are special. We are elite. Do you know what God answers them? In the same verse. Listen very carefully. The Jews and the Christians each say, we are the children of God and His most beloved. Say, O Prophet, why then does He punish you for your sins? Allah is reminding here. He's saying the answer is clear. No. You are like all my other creation. You do well, you are rewarded, you're appreciated. You do good, your reward is good. You do bad, you suffer the same repercussions that other people suffer. There's no special status here. قُلْ فَلِمَا يُعَذِّبُكُمْ بِذُنُوبِكُمْ بَلْ أَنْتُمْ بَشَرٌ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقَ. Rather, no, you are only humans like others of His creation. You are like everyone else. Allah is saying very clearly, never claim that because you belong to a certain race or to a certain religion or because you follow a certain faith that you become naturally better than other people. Don't claim that. Because you have a certain ancestry maybe. Never claim that. You are a creation like all of the creations of God. And Allah clarified who's better than the other in His eyes. Taqwa, taqwa. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The most honorable men amongst you to God are the most pious, are the most righteous. Righteousness. Very clear. يَغْفِرُ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيُعَذِّبُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah continues in the verse. He forgives whoever He wills. He punishes whoever He wills. And He says, to God alone belongs the kingdom of the heavens and the earth. To God alone. No one claimed to be special in the eyes of God in and of themselves. No one can. So this exaltation of themselves, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is clearly answering it and rejecting it. That you cannot do that. You are like all my other creation. And by the way, you might have heard, there might be some claims saying that what? If you're a Sayyid, if you're a Hashimi, you have a special status. That you will not be punished on the Day of Judgment. You might have heard these kind of things. I don't know where their roots are. But you might have heard this. If you're a Hashimi, if you're from the dynasty of Bani Hashim, okay, then the beasts wouldn't eat your flesh, or that on the Day of Judgment you won't have a severe punishment like everyone else. Where is this in the Quran? Where is this in the Quran? The Quran is very clear that there's no special status in that sense. There's no special status. Except in Iman. Amanu wa amilu salihat. Faith, have good Iman, do well, you will be elevated. Don't have faith or don't do well, you won't be elevated. Even prophets of God. This applies to the prophets as well. Prophets of God. Those who suffered on the path of God. This applies. Same thing applies. Amanu wa amilu salihat. It's by your deed. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in many verses. Anni, for example, la udi'u amala amilin minkum min dhakarin aw untha. Anyone who does any deed of you, whether male or female, it won't go in vain. It won't go in vain. By the way, this is a nice experiment for you to see. Do you get distracted easily or not? It's a good training for your salah, focus on salah, yes? So it's a training for me as well to see if I get distracted or I'm able to focus. Okay? Another verse from the Quran. So use this as a test. Another verse from the Quran. Chapter 9, verse number 30. What is chapter 9? Tawbah. Tawbah is 10, I think. Tawbah is 9. Okay, I'm sorry. Tawbah is 9. By majority voting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ عُزَيْرُ ibn Allah. عُزَيْرٌ ibn Allah. And the Jews say, Ezra is the son of God. While the Christians say, the Messiah is the son of God. Do you see here what's going on? Okay? So they're not claiming it about their own selves now. They're claiming it about certain great people. Great people. Jesus. Kalimatullah, Ruhullah. Great person. ذَلِكَ قَوْلُهُمْ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ. This is what they claim. This is what they say. This is the speech they claim. Okay? And apparently, they claim this, and they claim that they were having special relationship with God in and of themselves. As in, Jesus is the Son of God in and of himself. As in, if I worship Jesus, this is as if I worship God himself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, no, قَاتَلَهُمُ اللَّهُ أَنَّا يُؤْفَكُونَ قَاتَلَهُمُ اللَّهُ. May God condemn them. How can they be deluded from the truth? That's delusion. That's not correct. Allah is criticizing it. Another verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking also about those people. اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله. That's a very difficult test, mashallah. اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله والمسيح ابن مريم. They have taken their rabbis and monks as well as the Messiah, son of Mary, as lords besides God. Allah is saying here what the problem was. The problem wasn't to say that Jesus is a great person. That's fine. The problem was that they put him beside God. That was the issue. They're comparing a creation of God with God. That's the issue. It's okay to say that you are a servant of God and God elevated you. Yes, fine. But to say that you are someone of God and from God and comparable to God and a minor miniature copy of God, that's not acceptable. وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا إِلَهًا وَاحِدًا. Allah clarifies it here. And they were commanded to worship none but one God. He's saying it's a matter of worship. It seems that people are claiming these can be worshipped besides God. Allah is saying no. No. The command is that you may worship only God, no one else. No matter how holy, no matter how great, no one deserves to be worshipped but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this takes us to the last verse. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. And nothing, and there is none comparable to him. I believe, inshallah, this is a very clear verse now. Nothing can be compared to God. Nothing can be thought of as equal to God or close to God's status. You know, in Aristotelian logic, if you see where humans are classified, they're called like what? They're under the family of animals, but they speak or think. So humans are rational animals. That's a definition in logic, in Aristotelian logic at least. That man is a rational animal. So it's of the family of animals. Yes, man or human beings are very highly elevated than animals because of their ability of advanced skills of thinking and rationality and reasoning and so on, right? You might say that, well, the level is really high. Humans are very great, but they're still under the family of animals. The same thing. You can't say that, God is great, is so great. He's not like God is so great, for example, much greater than his creation. But then you still claim that, well, there's a family of gods. Yes, God is the greatest. Allah is the greatest in that family. But still you have subjected God to the same way of thinking. And that's unacceptable. I'll finish with this. A few comments on the recitation of Kufuwan, just as a ahkam note. You probably know that the word Kufuwan, it can be read in multiple ways. Okay? How many ways do you know of? How many ways can you recite Kufuwan? 4. Okay? 4 ways. One is kufuwan. One is kufwan. One is kuf'an. And one is kufu'an. Okay? So kufu or kuf, and then one or an. Okay? So there are four kind of variations. Obviously, one variation is not recommended, and that is the second one that I mentioned. Kuf one. Try to avoid it, according to Sayyid Sistani as well, out of precaution. Avoid that kind of reading. So recite, for example, recite kufu one, walam yakun lahu kufu one, or kufu an. So kufu, that's fine. Or kuf an. Kuf an. Kuf means someone who is equal. Kuf, who is equal in status, someone who is comparable, someone who is, a peer, equivalent. And I'll finish with this hadith attributed to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam that he said, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala لولا أن الله تعالى خلق أمير المؤمنين لم يكن لفاطمة كفء على وجه الأرض آدم فمن دونه. Had Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not created Imam Ali, Lady Fatima would not have had an equal who deserves her on the face of earth from Adam till the end of time. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let me give a brief summary then of the surah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. Emphasizing that God is one. God is one. The oneness of God is never separated from His essence. He is essentially, by His essence and nature, He is one. God is rich. God is not needy. Samad. God doesn't need anything or anyone. Everyone is in need of God. Every one of His creation is in need of Him. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. There's no special relationship between God and any of His creation. No familial relationship, no special status, no special, honorary status, nothing like that. Every creation of God is His creation. Nothing can be compared to Him. Nothing can be elevated to His status. Nothing can be thought of as a small copy of God, no matter how small. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. That God, there is no comparability between God and any of His creation. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Salamun ala al-mursaleen. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Salawat.